All right, today we're going to dive deep into a piece of technology that's, well, it's basically the forgotten foundation of our modern world. We're talking about a database system that ran the biggest companies on the planet long before anyone had ever even heard of SQL.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. We're so used to getting any piece of data we want, instantly. But before all that, before the internet, before PCs, how did massive organizations like global banks or the military handle all their critical data? The answer isn't just a different piece of software. It's a completely different way of thinking.
To get this, we have to jump in a time machine and go back to the 1970s. This was the age of the mainframe, these enormous, room-sized computers that were the absolute heart and soul of big business. And in that world, data played by a whole different set of rules.
And here it is, the key concept. This is the whole ball game. Today, we write a SQL query and we tell the database what we want. Back then, a programmer had to write code that told the database exactly how to find it. It was like giving it a turn-by-turn map to navigate a maze to get to the prize.
And that brings us to the hero of our story, the database that totally mastered this navigational style and became the go-to solution for any serious enterprise. The system was called IDMS.
But before we can really talk about IDMS, we have to talk about its rulebook, which was this thing called CodeDazzle. Think of it as a standards committee. They're the ones who laid out the blueprint for this new network data model, defining the structure, the language, basically creating the entire ecosystem that allowed something like IDMS to even exist.
And if CodeDazzle wrote the rules of the game, IDMS was the star player that absolutely dominated the league. It stands for Integrated Database Management System, and it was by far the most successful and widely used version of that CodeDazzle standard. It was a huge deal.
So how did it actually work under the hood? Well, you gotta forget everything you know about tables and foreign keys. In this network model, records were all connected through these things called sets, using direct pointers. It wasn't clean and organized like a spreadsheet. It was more like this incredibly complex and interconnected spider web of data. And getting to your data? Wow, it was a whole procedure. You couldn't just ask for something. No, you had to write code to do this dance first. Find your entry point, then find what's called an owner record, then follow a set of pointers to all its related member records until you finally, hopefully, landed on the piece of data you were looking for. It was a journey, not a simple query.
Now you're probably thinking, man, that sounds incredibly rigid and kind of complicated. And you know what? You'd be absolutely right. It was. But that rigidity, that was its superpower.
See, because every single data path was hard-coded by a programmer, the system knew exactly where to go. There was no guesswork, no need for an optimizer to figure things out on the fly. And the result? Two things that are absolutely critical for mainframes: blazing fast speed and rock-solid predictability.
And look who was using this stuff. We're not talking about small-time websites here. These were the systems that ran the entire global economy and government. Banks, insurance companies, the IRS, military supply chains. I mean, the biggest, most mission-critical operations you can imagine all ran on IDMS.
And this all leads us to the core philosophical difference, the big idea that really separated the world of IDMS from everything that would come after it.
This quote just says it all. It was a database you programmed, not one you queried. You didn't just have an analyst fire off a quick report. No, getting data was a formal act of software engineering.
And that programming was almost always done in COBOL, the enterprise language of the day. Developers would literally embed IDMS commands right into their COBOL programs, carefully crafting those step-by-step navigation paths to pull and update records. You can really see the two different worlds laid out here. IDMS was the programmer's database, right? It was procedural, rigid, and built for that predictable speed. SQL, on the other hand, well, that brought in the era of the analyst's database. It's declarative, it's flexible, and it's built for powerful, on-the-fly analysis. It was a revolution that changed everything.
So where does that leave IDMS today? Is it just some dusty old relic from a forgotten time? Not a chance. Its place in the history of technology is so much more important than that.
If you look at the whole timeline of how we've handled data, you can see that IDMS and the network model are a critical link in that chain. They were the bridge from the really early, super rigid hierarchical models to the flexible relational world of SQL that we know today. They proved that you could run the world's biggest enterprises on complex, structured data at scale.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. The lessons learned from building and running IDMS, lessons about data integrity, transaction processing, performance at scale, they paved the way for all the systems that came next. So it's not just some old piece of tech. It's literally part of the foundation that our modern data systems are built on.
And that kind of leaves us with a fun question to think about. Back in its day, IDMS was the undisputed king. It was the obvious way to handle data. So what about today? What are the foundational tools we use every single day that a few decades from now are going to be the subject of a history lesson just like this one?